this Bugatti, which is clearly in half. We did the impossible. But now it's going to get a lot harder because everything from now on is building the car and fixing it. We've got all the damaged parts off. Everyone thought that was hard, but it weren't.
Imagine spending over $1 million on a car. Not just any car, one of the rarest, most powerful, and most talked about machines ever made by human hands. You have worked incredibly hard, perhaps your entire adult life, to earn enough money to make this kind of purchase. Or maybe you have been fortunate enough to build a successful career or business that has given you the financial freedom most people only ever dream about. Either way, the day you sign the papers and take the keys to a Bugatti feels like the greatest moment of your life so far. You imagine the thunderous roar of the engine as it fires up the first time. You imagine the feel of the perfectly stitched leather seats wrapping around you, the smell of the interior, the way the car sits low and wide on the road like a crouching animal waiting to sprint. You imagine the reactions of people who see you drive past. It all feels like freedom. It feels like success. It feels like a reward you have truly earned. But then, somewhere down the road, sometimes just a few years after you purchase this dream machine, something goes wrong. Maybe the car starts making a sound it should not make. Maybe it hesitates when you try to accelerate. Maybe it refuses to select the right gear, or simply will not move the way it should. Naturally, you pick up the phone and call the manufacturer. After all, you spend an extraordinary amount of money on their product. You are a loyal customer of one of the most prestigious car brands in the entire world. Surely they will take care of you. But instead of getting the help you desperately need, you are met with silence. Or worse, you are eventually told that repairing the problem will cost you another $300,000 and that there is simply no other way to fix it. This is not a story that was invented to make a point. This is exactly what has been happening to real owners of the Bugatti Veyron, one of the most celebrated hypercars ever created. And in recent years, two determined and talented men, Mat Armstrong and Mark McCann, have stepped forward to challenge this deeply unfair system in a very public way. Their stories have shocked and inspired car lovers all around the world and forced millions of people to ask the question that really matters. When you buy a car, do you truly own it? Or does the manufacturer still hold all the power? To fully appreciate why the gearbox problem is such a big deal, it helps to first understand just how extraordinary the Bugatti Veyron actually is and what makes it so different from every other car on the road. When the Veyron was first revealed to the world in the early 2000s, it was genuinely unlike anything that had come before it. The car was a result of years of painstaking development by Bugatti's team of engineers, who had been given an almost impossible challenge. Build the fastest, most powerful, and most technologically advanced production car the world had ever seen. The result was a machine that broke records and shattered expectations on almost every level. At the heart of the Veyron sat a truly remarkable engine. Instead of the V8 or V12 engines found in most performance cars, the Veyron used a W16 engine, a configuration where 16 cylinders were arranged in a special W shape that allowed an enormous amount of power to be packed into a relatively compact space. On top of this already impressive architecture, for turbochargers were added. Turbochargers are devices that force extra compressed air into an engine, allowing it to burn more fuel and produce far more power than it could achieve naturally. The result of all this engineering was an engine that produced well over 1,000 horsepower, more than 5 times what you find in a typical family car, and significantly more than most racing vehicles of that era. The Veyron could reach a top speed of over 250 miles per hour, making it the fastest production car in the world at the time of its release. It could accelerate from a standstill to 60 miles per hour in under 3 seconds. These were numbers that seemed almost impossible for a car that could legally be driven on public roads. The car's appearance was equally dramatic. Its low, wide, sculpted body looked like it had been designed in a wind tunnel, which it largely had been. The massive intake on the roof fed cool air directly to the hungry engine. The interior was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, with every surface covered in premium leather, carbon fiber, or polished metal. Owning one felt less like owning a car and more like owning a piece of living history. New Veyron sold for well over $1 million, and special limited editions cost considerably more. Even today, used examples in good condition fetch hundreds of thousands of dollars. People who buy them are not just making a transportation purchase. They are acquiring an artifact, a monument to what human engineering was capable of achieving at a specific moment in history. It is for precisely this reason that what happens when one of these cars breaks down matters so much. Every car ever built has a gearbox, also called transmission. This is a mechanical system that takes the power produced by the engine and transfers it to the wheels in a usable form, allowing the car to travel at different speeds efficiently. In virtually every car that has ever been made, if the gearbox develops a fault or a worn component, a skilled mechanic can open the unit, identify the specific part that has failed, replace it, reassemble everything, and return the car to working order. This is standard practice. This is how car repair has worked for well over 100 years. The Bugatti Veyron, however, is a very different story, and the difference is one that many owners did not fully understand when they signed their purchase agreements. Bugatti designed a Veyron's gearbox as what engineers call a sealed unit. This means the entire transmission is built as a single self-contained, closed system. It is not designed to be opened. It is not designed to be worked on in pieces. Individual internal components cannot simply be removed and swapped out like they can in the gearboxes of other cars. The entire unit functions as one integrated block, and if any part of it fails, the official position from Bugatti has always been the same. The whole thing must be replaced. Bugatti's reasoning for this design choice relates to the extraordinary demands placed on the gearbox by the W16 engine. The torque, the rotational force that the engine sends through the transmission, is almost beyond imagination for a road car. The internal components of the gearbox must be manufactured to incredibly precise specifications and must work together with a level of accuracy that leaves almost no room for error. The unit uses a combination of steel and aluminum components, which are both necessary for their specific properties, but which can interact in a harmful way if moisture or other contaminants get inside the housing. This reaction, known as galvanic corrosion, can eat away at the internal surfaces of the gearbox over time, gradually compromising its ability to function and eventually causing total failure. Once corrosion takes hold inside a sealed gearbox, there is nowhere for the damage to go except further and further inside the unit. Debris from corroding surfaces floats through the transmission fluid, scratching and wearing components that were not originally damaged. Hydraulic channels become blocked or compromised. What began as a small chemical reaction slowly grows into a complete mechanical catastrophe hidden inside a metal box that nobody is meant to open. For owners, the financial consequences of this design are devastating. When the gearbox finally fails completely, Bugatti's official solution is a full replacement unit, which costs close to $300,000. That is not a typo. $300,000. An amount greater than the purchase price of most brand-new luxury cars, simply to replace one component in a car that already costs over $1 million to buy. The first person to take on Bugatti's restrictive repair system in a truly public and high-profile way was a British mechanic and YouTube creator named Mat Armstrong. Understanding who Armstrong is and where he comes from matters a great deal to understanding why his story resonated so powerfully with so many people around the world. Armstrong is not a wealthy man from a privileged background. He is not a factory-trained technician with access to specialist tools and official support networks. He is a self-made mechanic with a deep passion for cars, a remarkable amount of hands-on skill, and an audience of millions of people who follow his work on YouTube because they admire his honesty, his determination, and his willingness to take on challenges that most sensible people would walk away from. His project began when he acquired Bugatti Chiron, the successor to the Veyron, and an even more advanced and expensive hypercar that had been involved in a serious accident and badly damaged. The car had been assessed by various parties and deemed too complex and too expensive to repair. It sat broken, waiting to either be scrapped or somehow brought back to life by someone with enough courage to try. Armstrong decided he would be that someone. He brought the shattered Chiron into his garage and began the long, difficult process of assessing the damage, sourcing parts, and attempting to rebuild, all without any technical support from Bugatti, without access to factory documentation, and without any of the specialized tools that Bugatti's own technicians would use. He documented every single step of this process on camera and shared it with his audience in real time. Viewers watched as he made progress, hit obstacles, found creative solutions, and occasionally had to go back to the drawing board when something did not work. His transparency was total when things went wrong. He showed that too. He did not pretend it was easy. when Bugatti refused to help or supply parts. He said so clearly and moved on to find another way. The significance of what Armstrong did was not just mechanical. Yes, his technical skills were impressive, but what really mattered was the message his project sent to the world. He demonstrated, in front of millions of people, that the barriers Bugatti had built around its technology were not quite as absolute as the company wanted everyone to believe. He showed that a determined and skilled independent mechanic, working without factory support, could make meaningful progress on a car that had been written off by almost everyone. And he did it all openly on camera, for free, for anyone in the world to watch and learn from. That openness, that willingness to share knowledge rather than hoard it, was perhaps the most powerful thing about Armstrong's project. It turned a personal mechanical challenge into a public conversation about ownership, access, and the rights of consumers. When Mat Armstrong's story began spreading across the internet and attracting enormous attention from the automotive community, another high-profile figure was watching carefully and preparing to take on his own version of the same challenge. Mark McCann is a very different person from Mat Armstrong in almost every outward respect. Where Armstrong operates from modest garages and works on a tight budget, McCann is a multi-time British and world champion racing driver who has built an enormous YouTube following and extraordinarily impressive personal car collection. That collection is estimated to be worth around $13 million in total and includes some of the most exclusive and expensive machines money can buy, among them a $1.6 million McLaren P1, one of the rarest and most powerful road cars ever produced. McCann is deeply embedded in the world of high-performance automotive culture. He knows cars, he knows the community, and he knew, before he bought his broken Bugatti Veyron, exactly what kind of challenge he was taking on. The specific car McCann purchased was not a standard Veyron. It had been extensively modified by a company called Mansory, a well-known luxury customization firm that specializes in taking already expensive cars and making them even more exclusive through additional bodywork, interior upgrades, and performance enhancements. The Mansory modifications on McCann's car had originally cost more than $400,000. They included bodywork changes designed to make the car resemble a special edition Veyron called the Persang, which was famous for its exposed carbon fiber body panels. McCann paid approximately $1.22 million for this car. On paper, it sounded like an extraordinary purchase, a rare, modified, ultra-exclusive hypercar with a fascinating and glamorous history. In reality, the car that McCann acquired was in a far worse state than its impressive provenance suggested. It had been sitting in pieces across two separate garages for more than 3 years, and every previous attempt to repair it had ended in failure. The gearbox was completely non-functional, unable even to select reverse gear. Several body panels were damaged, and in a discovery that was particularly frustrating for someone who had paid a premium price partly based on the car's supposed carbon fiber bodywork. Much of what appeared to be genuine exposed carbon fiber was actually vinyl wrap, a thin cosmetic film applied over regular panels to make them look like the real thing. It was a significant deception that added an extra layer of complication to an already deeply challenging situation. McCann found this car not through a public sales listing, but through personal connections within the close-knit world of exotic car collectors. He went into the purchase with clear eyes, fully aware of the problems. What drove him forward was the same spirit that drives Armstrong, a refusal to accept that something extraordinary should simply be abandoned when it breaks. Once Mark McCann had the car in his workshop and his team had carried out a thorough assessment of all problems, it became unmistakably clear that the gearbox was the most serious and most urgent issue. The combination of years sitting in used, exposure to moisture, and the chemical reaction between the steel and aluminum components inside had turned the transmission into a mechanical disaster. The hydraulic systems that control the gear changes were compromised. The clutch plates inside the sealed unit showed signs of significant damage and contamination. There was metallic debris floating in what remained of the transmission fluid, debris that had no business being there, and that indicated serious internal wear and failure. The gearbox needed either a complete replacement or a level of independent engineering intervention that had almost never been attempted before on this type of car. McCann's first step was entirely reasonable. He contacted Bugatti. He explained the situation in detail, described the state of the car and its gearbox, and asked for assistance. Specifically, He wanted to know what a replacement gearbox would cost and how long it would take to obtain one. The response from Bugatti was both predictable, based on Armstrong's earlier experience, and deeply frustrating. Bugatti confirmed what they had always maintained. The internal components of the gearbox could not be repaired. The sealed unit design meant that once something went wrong inside, there was no official fix other than a complete replacement. The cost of that replacement was approximately $300,000. This number alone would give most people pause. But what happened next made the situation even more difficult to accept. McCann and his team tried for several weeks to get a clear, confirmed price from Bugatti, along with a realistic timeline for when a replacement unit could be supplied. Phone calls were made, messages were sent, and almost nothing came back. Bugatti simply went quiet. There were no detailed responses. There were no apologies for the delay. There were no alternative suggestions. There was just silence, the same silence that Mat Armstrong had encountered before him. Eventually, McCann had no realistic option but to go public. In a video that was watched by millions of people, he stated clearly that Bugatti had essentially left him and his team to figure out the problem on their own. He was not angry in an explosive way. He was calm, but the frustration in his voice was unmistakable, and his audience understood immediately why. Here was a man who had spent well over $1 million on a product from one of the world's most exclusive manufacturers, who had reached out politely and professionally for help with the product fault, and who had been met with nothing. No special treatment, no priority service, no acknowledgement of the difficulty of his situation. The manufacturer's wall was just as high for a world champion racing driver with a $13 million car collection as it was for any other customer. Faced with an official repair quote of $300,000 and a manufacturer that would not even return calls, Mark McCann needed a different solution. The path he found led him to a Dutch engineer named Pascal, and what followed became one of the most remarkable stories of independent automotive engineering in recent memory. Pascal was not a Bugatti-trained technician. He had no official relationship with the manufacturer and no special access to their proprietary technical documentation or spare part supply chain. What Pascal did have was a rare combination of deep engineering knowledge, access to the very latest computer-aided design technology, and a personal willingness to take on a project that most professionals in his field would have immediately walked away from. The challenge Pascal faced was enormous. The Veyron gearbox's internal components, the clutch plates, gasket seals, and various precision machine parts inside the sealed housing had to be recreated from scratch. There were no spare parts available through official channels. There were no blueprints or technical drawings in the public domain. Pascal would have to study the existing components, measure them with extraordinary precision, model them digitally in CAD software, and then use precision manufacturing equipment to produce brand new versions that met the incredibly tight tolerances demanded by the W16 engine's power output. To understand why this is so difficult, consider what tight tolerances actually means in practice. When a component inside a high-performance gearbox is manufactured, it must match its design specification to within fractions of a millimeter. If a clutch plate is even slightly too thick or too thin, too wide or too narrow, it will not function correctly in the transmission at the power levels produced by the Veyron's engine. Even a tiny discrepancy could lead to catastrophic failure, not just of the gearbox itself, but potentially of other expensive drivetrain components as well. Pascal had to get this exactly right. The process he undertook was painstaking and methodical. The gearbox was carefully disassembled, something Bugatti insists cannot and should not be done. Each internal component was removed, cleaned, and measured. The damaged parts were identified. Then the long process of designing replacement components and manufacturing them to required specifications began. This work took a significant amount of time and required multiple iterations before the components met the required standards. It was a triumph of modern engineering, but it was also a triumph of determination and refusal to give up. What Pascal and McCann's collaboration demonstrated was profound. It showed that the Veyron gearbox, for all of Bugatti's insistence that it was a sealed, unrepairable unit, could in fact be opened, assessed, and repaired by skilled independent engineers with access to the right technology. The sealed system was not sealed because independent repair was truly impossible. It was sealed because Bugatti chose to design and market it that way. The distinction matters enormously. The stories of Armstrong and McCann shine an uncomfortable but necessary light on something that is rarely discussed honestly in the world of exotic car enthusiasm: the true cost of owning one of these machines over time. When most people think about buying a hypercar, the conversation naturally starts and often ends with the purchase price. A Bugatti Veyron costs over $1 million. That number is so large, so far outside the experience of ordinary life, that it tends to overwhelm any other financial consideration. People who can afford to spend that much money on a car, the reasoning goes, can surely afford whatever it costs to maintain it. But the reality of Veyron ownership, as McCann's experience makes painfully clear, is far more complicated and far more expensive than even the already daunting purchase price suggests. Beyond the purchase price, Veyron owners face a constant stream of ongoing costs that can add up to truly staggering sums. Regular servicing intervals for the car have historically involved costs in the tens of thousands of dollars, even when nothing is actually broken. The tires on a Veyron are custom items mounted on bespoke rims that require specialist removal and fitting equipment. Replacing a full set can cost thousands of dollars just for the process of changing them, before you even consider the cost of the tires themselves. Insurance for a car worth over $1 million and capable of traveling at more than 250 miles per hour is predictably expensive. Storage in a suitable climate-controlled environment adds another layer of ongoing expense. None of these costs are small, but all of them together are still dwarfed by the gearbox problem. $300,000 to replace a single mechanical component is a number that defies easy comprehension. It is more money than most people in the world will earn in several years of working. It is more than enough to buy a genuinely excellent family home in many parts of the world. And it is a cost that Veyron owners might face with almost no warning, because the sealed gearbox design means that the early stages of internal failure are hidden from view, making it impossible to catch problems early and address them cheaply before they become catastrophic. The financial exposure created by this design is enormous. As the Veyron fleet ages, the last cars were produced in 2015, meaning all of them are now at least a decade old. The risk of gearbox failures across the existing ownership base will only increase. Owners who bought their cars expecting the usual challenges of exotic car maintenance are instead facing the possibility of a single repair bill that rivals the original purchase price of the car. This is not a reasonable or acceptable situation, and a number of people who are now aware of it thanks to Armstrong and McCann's public documentation of their experiences is growing rapidly. Tio makes sense of why Bugatti behaves the way it does toward owners like Armstrong and McCann. It is necessary to step back and look at the company's fundamental philosophy about its own products and its relationship with the people who buy them. Bugatti is not a normal car company. It does not produce hundreds of thousands of cars a year. It does not have a mainstream customer base or compete on price. Bugatti produces a tiny number of cars, often fewer than 100 in any given year, and sells them at prices that put them far beyond the reach of almost everyone on Earth. The company positions itself not as a manufacturer of transportation,